Welcome in, everybody. We'll get started in about 2 minutes. I thought I'd let everybody in and get comfortable and situated, and we'll get started in about a minute and a half. Well, Maddie, this is our last in our series of 3 of this webinar, and I think we've got it down to a science. But we will be having more, and we will be talking about this more. And if anybody wants the recording to share with colleagues, friends, customers, etc., please let us know. Why don't you kick it off for us, Maddie?
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us again on our last Navigating the New Requirements webinar, what you should know about backups and MFA. My name is Maddie, and I'm an underwriter here at Wingman. And today I will be interviewing Ellie on some of the new requirements that we are, now asking for. So let's get started here. To go over some objectives, we're going to talk about what MFA and backups are, why these security measures are important. We will talk about how to implement these security measures, as well as some other notable items. And then we'll do a little question and answer session at the end. We do have a Q&A box and a chat system on this Zoom webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them either in the chat, the Q&A, or hold them until the end, and we'll be happy to answer them for you. So Ellie, kick us off today. What is multi-factor authentication?
Well, first off, thank you guys for joining us. This is a complicated topic, and we're going to be talking about it quite a bit over the next few months and probably in perpetuity. So I'm happy to start the conversation now and start talking about it. As I just want to reiterate what Maddie just said, questions are going to come up. I really hope that you ask them. Every story, every anecdote is helping us build a better picture of how MFA specifically applies to your clients. So please don't hesitate and ask all the questions that you want. All right, what is MFA? Multi-factor authentication, or sometimes referred to as two-factor authentication. You'll sometimes see it with a 2FA. It's a means by which you can keep accounts secure. Think about it this way. We have, up to this point in our history with the internet, been able to use a username and password to safely and securely keep other people out of our data, whether it be an email system, whether it be your database, your agency management system, et cetera. That's been fairly effective. The problem with that is that when people use the same username and or passwords for multiple different services, and one of those services has a data breach, bad actors can then use your username and password to enter other services that you might use. So what's the solution? The solution is finding a second way or a second factor to authenticate that you are who you say you are when attempting to log in on a new device. Most commonly, you're going to see this in several ways. First, you will enter your username and password, and then it will ask you for a code of some kind. And that code will either be texted to you, emailed to you, or you will get it from an application on your phone. Those are the most common. It is frequently used for email accounts, but it can also be turned on any other number of online services that you might be using. And so that's the general idea of multi-factor authentication.
Great explanation, Ellie. Why does an insured need MFA though?
That's a great question. MFA, when it's turned on, as I just mentioned, ensures that the person is really who they say they are, because they're going to be sending that code, whether it be text, email, or whatever, to another service. So that ensures that you're going to get it. Let me give you a really specific account from this morning on why MFA is so important. And aside from that, and before I even get to my anecdote, let me just tell you that the number you see on the screen right now is 100% accurate. According to Microsoft, well in excess of 99% of accounts that were compromised did not have MFA turned on. That's how vital it is and how big of a difference just having MFA turned on is to preventing cyber breaches. So let me tell you my anecdote and then we'll get more into why it's so important. This morning I got a ping on my cell phone that said someone was trying to log into my Apple iCloud account from halfway around the world. And obviously, I don't know anybody who is currently halfway around the world who is attempting to log into my iCloud account. And I have MFA turned on for my iCloud account. And what that means is that they send me a code to enter in order to let that person to pass along to let that person in. I obviously did not do that. I reported that it wasn't me, and it gave me the prompt to go ahead and change my password and kick everybody who might be signed on to my account out and make them re-sign in with the code to ensure that it is me. It prevented a breach of my security just this morning. And by the way, if you had attended any one of our previous webinars on this topic, you heard a different story because this is the second time this has happened to me. 2 different services, by the way. One was for Instagram. This was just for iCloud in the last 2 weeks. So this happens all the time. And it is incredibly secure and it really, really, really helps. So having this second step will protect your accounts from any leak of data or your login credentials from any other services. Now, you probably have all received reports previously of your data being exposed in various different data breaches, whether it be, for me, Ticketfly or Home Depot or Wells Fargo or Equifax, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. And so if it has, then that means those credentials are out there. And if you use them for any other service and MFA isn't turned on, then your data is not secure. So that's why MFA is so important.
Great. Now, Ellie, you mentioned that you use MFA for your iCloud. Do you mind going over a little bit how it would work with an email account, let's say?
Absolutely. Here's the kicker. And here's one of the questions we get asked most of all. How do I know that MFA is turned on if it doesn't ask me every single time I log in for that code? And the interesting story here is that basically what you're going to do is you're going to log in as an admin on your email server for your email server, whether that be the Gmail admin portal or the Microsoft 365 admin portal. You're going to navigate over to the security settings and you're going to toggle on the button that says require MFA for all users. And that's very important. And then every time someone goes to set up a new device or log in from a new browser or access their data from a new source, then you'll be prompted to enter your username and email as usual. And then you will be asked to verify with that second code via text or email or app. It will provide you the code. It will check to make sure the codes match. And if it does, then you are let in. If it doesn't, then what happens like this morning will happen to you. You'll get a ping that says someone is trying to log in from an unknown location. If this isn't you, go in and change your username and password. And that's how it works. So it's not every time necessarily that you're logging in to say for your email that you need to have this code. It's only when you're setting up a new device. Now, you might recognize this concept from something like banking, where it may require you to have a code or a key fob with the codes on it or something like that every time you log in. And that's completely normal for banking. But for email, it's only when you're setting up a new device or a new computer or a new browser or using a new browser or a new iPhone or something like that, that it's going to ask you for those codes.
All right, Ellie. I've heard a lot of pushback on, okay, I don't know, maybe my insured doesn't need MFA if they have something like a VPN or a remote desktop protocol, or maybe they keep their data in third party. Would you mind touching on this a little bit? Is VPN or RDP enough, or do they need MFA too?
All right, so great question, by the way. Think about your cybersecurity as a house, and you live in that house and you have all of your data surrounding you. And currently, if you don't use any outside services or anything, or you're only working on an individual device in a physical office space, then it's a house with no windows, no doors, and a really well-constructed roof. VPN, or virtual private network, is one of two ways that you can be outside of the house, but still able to access every single piece of data in the house. But in order to do that, you got to have a door that can open and close and let people in and out to see all of that data. As you can imagine, that is incredibly not secure. RDP, or remote desktop protocol, is a similar way of being able to be outside of the house and looking into your house and able to access all of the data inside the house. But RDP takes it a step further and essentially allows you to move around inside that data in a way that it's almost as if the house has no roof. So as you can imagine, as you can see where I'm going with this, both VPN and remote desktop protocol are security problems, and you must have multi-factor authentication turned on if you use either one of these services. And let me go back to our same example. Imagine you use Citrix, which is very common, to RDP, or have a remote desktop protocol into your computer system. You're going to log into that remote desktop protocol using a username and password. Now, my first question I always ask is it a completely unique username and password? The vast majority of you are probably saying it's not, because it's the same password you use to log onto your desktop physically in your office. Maybe it's your email. Maybe it's, again, what you used at Home Depot or Ticketfly, yada, yada, yada. It is equally as unsecure as any other username and password that you log into. However, if you have MFA turned on in order to access it, then you are absolutely putting that roof back on the house. Now, let's think about it another way. Let's say you don't use VPN or RDP, or maybe you use them and they're encrypted. That's not any better. You still need MFA turned on because the data flow is still moving in and out. But let's say more frequently, and for the people on this call more pertinently, you keep your data with a third-party service provider. That can be anything from Google Cloud to your agency management system, like whether you use Applied or Epic or whatever they're calling it now, or Vertafore, AMS 360, or EasyLinks, or an Agency Matrix, who had just had a massive data breach. So a lot of you guys are putting your data somewhere else, and it works for a lot of your clients this way too. Maybe they're a doctor's office and they use a digital billing or electronic medical record system, or a digital billing system, et cetera. That does not absolve you from needing MFA turned on to access that data. Because again, same thing. If your credentials are out there and someone is able to use it to log in to your Vertafore account, they can get in and they can see all your client data and all of your customer information and navigate all around everything, everywhere. And so any place where you house data should have MFA turned on. That's really, really very important. And for any of you that might be on this call right now who were a part of the agency matrix breach, you know how important that is. Because once that data is out there, it is your responsibility because you gave it to that third party to keep safe. And so you have to do your part.
Really great explanation, Ellie. Let's talk a little bit about what apps are good to use. Is there any specifically that we require insureds to use? And then also let's talk about a few tips for increased security.
So you're going to see this list on the left-hand side of your screen that are commonly used authenticator applications on your phone. It is by no means an exhaustive list. For example, Adobe has its own, Microsoft has its own, and they all work ostensibly the exact same way. So you might be wondering why, if we don't require certain ones, which we don't, would you need to know these? And the answer is if your customer knows that they use one of these, you can recognize them from this list or Google it and figure out that that's an authenticator app, which means they must have MFA turned on. So that's why we want to present these to you. You can familiarize yourself with this list or a more exhaustive list if you like, and it'll help you when talking to clients to see if they use any of these services and in what capacities they use them to help them determine if they have MFA turned on. Also, if they're like, well, which one should we use? Really, all of them work the same. Whichever is easiest for them to implement is the answer. Let's give you also a few tools in your toolbox to help your customers be more secure with regards to all of the things that we just discussed. Now, as you can imagine, all of this stems from the idea that a username and password is quite frankly not secure. It's not. But there are some things that you can do to make them just a little bit more secure. in addition to having multi-factor authentication. And that is always using a complicated password and changing that password fairly frequently. I know it's a pain. It's an absolute pain in the behind to do that, but you got to do it. And there are easy ways that you can. And we'll get to those in a second. Make sure that not everybody is on an admin level account. When you think of an admin level, it means they can see everything from a 10,000 foot view and really access all the data. Most users on a computer network do not and should not need that kind of access to all of the data. And when you separate and silo your data, you're ensuring that maybe if there is a data breach, their likelihood of them being able to get to everything is smaller. If you've ever joined us for our webinar before, you are going to have heard this one before, and that is every single time one of those updates are available, things pops up on your desktop or your laptop or your phone, immediately stop what you're doing and upload it and download it. It's incredibly important to keep all software up to date because the vast majority of software updates are actually security patches, meaning they have identified a problem in the software and they are cleaning it up so that it isn't a problem for you. The longer you wait, the longer that there is a known vulnerability that somebody can take advantage of. So it's very important that you always update your software immediately when you see those things pop up. And finally, on this one, and this is circling back to the first point, password managers are your friend. They are free or nearly free. They can keep you using unique passwords for every single one of your services. That's incredibly important. It ensures strong passwords. It makes up the passwords for you and it keeps the passwords for you. It's really, really important. I personally use a company called LastPass. It is so easy to use. I have it on all of my devices and it will autofill all of my secret passwords from every random device. And you have to have, and I have MFA turned on to LastPass. And so that's really great. Maddie uses 1Password, also a tremendously good service, free, fantastic, and works exactly the same way. It doesn't matter which one you use or if you use a different one, but we do recommend one of these two, as we know that they are excellent at what they do. They keep passwords safe. They keep them complicated. They tell you when you've had, if the password you're using has been exposed in a data breach before, so that you can immediately update it. All of those things are really important for your security and for your customer security. So if you're working on a way to help people take small steps to make big impacts, these are all things I would recommend.
Awesome. So before we switch gears here, I wanted to see if we have any questions. MFA, like Ellie mentioned, is a really difficult and new topic. So please feel free to put any questions you might have in the Q&A or the chat. I also want to mention, while we're at a good halfway point here, that we will be sending out a copy of the slides as well as the recording. So you don't have to worry about jotting down every note you have. So again, if anyone has questions, feel free to chat them. If not, we will move on with what backups are and why your insured needs them.
So a backup is a more easy to understand concept, but it has some nuance that we want to make sure everybody takes into account when talking to their customers and really digging in with their customers, particularly for larger, more complicated accounts, on how this stuff works. A backup is a digital snapshot of an earlier time of all of your data. This is really important because what it does is it ensures that should you ever have a situation, whether it be a cyber attack, whether it be a bad software upgrade, or just a crash of your computer system, that data is safe and secure somewhere else so that you can always have access to it should you lose your primary copy. There can be hardware failures or a computer system hack, data loss, data corruption, or inability to access your data are three of the primary ways that major cyber events occur. And having a backup ensures that you won't be out of commission when that happens. I love this slide because it really simplifies what the two key ingredients are of a data backup. So we've already talked about it's an archive of your important information. You're creating a copy. That's great. But here's the kicker. It has to have two factors to be considered a viable backup. It has to be secure and it has to be in a separate location. So let me give you examples of 2 ways that these things would not be fulfilled. First, let's imagine you keep all of your data on an external hard drive, including the copy of your data and your backups on that external hard drive. That's not separate locations. That means all of your data is in one location. And even though you have a copy, if you lose that drive, if that drive gets corrupted, if that drive gets a virus, et cetera, it wouldn't matter that you had that copy because both copies would be affected. So a separate location is important. We're going to talk more about that in a second. It also needs to be secure. There are very easy ways that you can keep your backups secure. Number 1, do not use the same username and password to log into your backups or to access your backups that you do for anything else. I think we've just spent the last 10 minutes talking about why that's important. Number 2, anti-malware and antivirus software should be installed on your backup to ensure that if ever you download a copy of your data that has a virus on it, it will catch it and get rid of it. Because again, if you're making a copy of your data and there's a problem with it and you don't have any way of finding out if that's good data, then you can't necessarily use it to restore your data as it is. So it's really important that it be secure. And finally, turn MFA on for your backups if you're using a cloud-based backup source, because again, it's not helpful if anybody can access your backups just like they could access your primary data.
Great, Ellie. Let's talk a little bit about an option to use for backups on Microsoft 365.
So one of the easiest ways and one of the most overlooked ways that people can back up data is the documents and other information that is stored on your actual computers. Most people, really the vast majority of customers, have a subscription to Microsoft 365. It is what provides you a license for your Microsoft Word and Office and everything else. But it also comes with a few other special tricks. One of them is called OneDrive. And OneDrive allows you to create a copy of all of your data in a separate folder in the cloud. And this is a backup. This was 100% a backup of your data. And oftentimes, if you're not thinking about backups in terms of all of the data that you own or possess or need, you probably are overlooking the documents in your downloads and your documents folders. This is a great way to back that up. So here are the instructions for how to use it. We also recommend a lot of other services like iDrive for larger databases of data, but don't overlook the little things because, your emails, your documents, your downloads, et cetera, are all things that you're going to want a copy of somewhere. And if you're not keeping them in the cloud, then this is a great way to make a copy of them in the cloud. Any questions on any of this stuff, please just toss them in the chat or the Q&A. We're really happy to answer any questions. We know this stuff is incredibly important. It's also kind of complicated and very issue specific. And we're building this sort of learning lab of information and specific examples entirely based on your guys' feedback. So don't hold back.
All right, much like multi-factor authentication, do we recommend any vendors to use? Is there one that insureds must use for backups? And then also, Ellie, tell us a little bit about some other security measures to consider when it comes to backups.
Yeah, so there are more backup services than stars in the sky. Any of them are great as long as they fill our 2 criteria that they are both secure and in a separate location. So this is, again, a recognition list so that if you see this on an application, you know that they're using a good backup service, but it is by no means an exhaustive list. So let's talk about some other questions or other things that you might come across when dealing with backups. First off, is people are going to ask if there's a difference between an offline backup versus an online backup. Now, I've actually been talking about both intermixed throughout this conversation. An offline backup would be an external hard drive you keep in a fireproof safe. It's very different from an online backup, which is a cloud-based copy of your data also on the internet and accessible via the internet. Ironically, they both have pros and cons. An offline backup is going to be incredibly secure because nobody can hack into your fireproof safe in your basement. The problem is it's a pain in the butt to actually make the copies and put them on the drive. It's a manual process. An online backup, you can sort of set and forget. It will download copies of your data on a scheduled period of time, whether it be daily, weekly, monthly, whatever, and you can access it from anywhere. The problem, of course, is that if you don't have antivirus, anti-malware, MFA, et cetera, it's not necessarily going to be helpful in the event of an actual problem. So what's the solution? We do both. Does everybody need to do both? No, you absolutely only need to do one or the other. But if you want to be extra specially careful, both is incredibly wonderful. But no, you do not need to pick one or the other. They both have pros and cons, and whichever your customer is using will be fine. Here's the common refrain of this entire thing. Use separate access credentials for backups than any ones you've used for anything else, period, hands down. It doesn't matter if it's on a drive or it's in the cloud. You're going to have to log into it somehow and make sure they're separate credentials. Here's a big one. Test your backups regularly. Don't just do it and then never think about it again. That's not going to be helpful because, again, you're not checking to see if any data has been corrupted or the copies aren't working or it's not you've run out of space or yada, yada, yada. Make sure you're constantly checking on your backups to make sure they function. And then make sure that your backups are up to date and happening on a regular basis. Whether you're using offline or online, making sure your data is up to date is important. If you did a backup 6 months ago and you have a breach today, that's not going to particularly be helpful. You're going to lose 6 months worth of data. So that's not as helpful, but making sure that they're regularly occurring will help with that problem. Any questions on this stuff? Okay.
All right, so that concludes our mini session on backups. Ellie, a lot of people on this call have probably seen the new revamped full cyber application as pictured on the right side. A lot of the questions on this application are not self-explanatory. Can you go through a few terms that both our agents and their clients might not be familiar with?
Absolutely. First off, we have to sort of apologize because unlike many lines of business, a cyber insurance application was, for whatever reason, not written for a business owner to fill out. Most business owners are not going to know what these terms are, let alone know if their business has them because they're very in the weeds. And so a lot of times these applications are going to get forwarded to an IT person, either internally or externally, that manages the cybersecurity of a business. And that's fine. But you're probably going to get some questions from business owners on what the heck are these terms? What do they even mean? So let's go through a couple that you might be hearing and what you need to know about them. The first one is role-based training. I've had so many issues with this question that I'm going to let you in on a little secret. We're taking it off the application. It's complicated. It doesn't make sense. But essentially, what it's asking about is that, let's say you run a business, you have an accounting department, a service department, a sales department, that each role within that company knows what they should have access to and what they shouldn't. And if they do have access to something that they shouldn't, letting somebody know to again, silo that data off. It's all about knowing your role and the cybersecurity tools for your role. So for example, if you're in accounting, knowing that you should authenticate payment requests, et cetera. It's complicated. It's unnecessary. It's coming off the application. So kudos to everybody who had feedback on that one. We've successfully beaten down an insurance company to get rid of a question on the application. Number 2, remote desktop protocol. We've already talked about that a little bit with regards to MFA, but I want to talk about it again because you're going to see it as a real sticking point for insurance companies. If a business has remote desktop protocol and does not have security measures in place like MFA, they are not going to offer insurance. Period, bar, hands down, that's it. They're not going to offer it. Because again, it's like taking the roof off of the house and then expecting not to get wet when it rains. So that's an important one to recognize, that if you get an application back from a customer that says, yes, they use remote desktop protocol. And again, you're most commonly going to see names like Citrix when this comes up. If they use Citrix to get in to their system, then MFA 100% needs to be turned on, or don't bother sending in the app to any insurance company out there because it's a big old red flag. Next, endpoint detection and response solutions. So imagine that, again, we're working on the house. The house has to have a fence, and this fence is the endpoint detection and response solutions. It's checking to make sure that there's no gates open, and if there is, it'll shut the gate. It's There are many services out there that sort of sit around the periphery of your data, trying to keep it secure, let you know that somebody's trying to get in or that there's a door or window open. And those are often specifically named companies. Carbon Black Cloud and Microsoft Defender are two of the bigger ones, but there's a couple of others. They're even listed on the application so that you can recognize them with your customer. A lot of decent sized businesses are going to be implementing one of these tools, and they're really good to have. Another one that we deal with on this front is intrusion detection. That's fairly straightforward if you think about it. It's checking to make sure there aren't intruders trying to get into your system. That is very important as well. And the more sophisticated a risk, the more likely they will need to have these things in place in order to even get insurance at this point.
All right,
Okay.
Ellie. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I'll just jump into this one. This is the last one of this that I think you guys need to be able to recognize, and for a very specific reason. These three terms, DKIM, DMARC, and SPF, will appear on all cyber applications that you see from this point forward. And the way that it's listed makes it seem like you deploy one or the other, kind of like the previous thing about Microsoft Defender or Carbon Black Cloud, but that's not the case. Each one of these things does something different to protect the authenticity of emails within your email server. So if you use any of these, it's a mix and match list, if you will. It's not a choose one necessarily. Most businesses that use one are going to be using more than one. Probably they should be using all three. Really, there's 5. You could be using all 5. You'll see them in the graphic on the right-hand side. But these are all incredibly important to keep email secure. And you don't necessarily need to know what each one of them is specifically, although we have it here for you. The important thing is to know that it's not a pick one on the application. Most of your clients are going to have more than one, all of them, or a combination thereof. And that's totally normal, and don't get freaked out by that on the application itself. Any questions on those? All right, well, now's your chance. Tell me about the random customer you have that swears that they don't need MFA and how we're going to convince them that that's absolutely not true. Bring it on. We'll answer anything you've got. I also just want to mention, and Maddie will bring it up again, it's going to drop it into the chat right now, that we have a third-party cybersecurity specialist coming in to do a special series for you and your clients. Where the first webinar we're going to be hosting is just for our agents. The webinar registration link is going in the chat right now. And essentially, it is to let you guys see how cybersecurity specialists can talk to your customers about implementing all of the things that we've talked about today. And then if you like and appreciate the content, then we are going to allow you, we're going to set up a schedule of a few additional webinars, and you can invite your customers themselves, any that you know are going to be a problem in upcoming renewals or whatever, to get ahead of this problem and have somebody that they can talk to and ask their questions to about how to implement these things for their specific businesses. So that registration link is now in the chat. And I encourage all of you guys to register for this, because your customers absolutely need an ally in their corner to answer these questions and work with their IT departments to get these things implemented prior to renewal. So we can do the overview, but we really are not equipped internally to be talking to your customers about this. So we've brought in a ringer to help with that. So I hope that you guys will all register for that webinar as well. And if you like it, inviting all of your customers to join us. Any other questions? We'll take them now. If you do have any and you just don't want to share them today or with the group, that's fine. You can email us at info@wingmanins.com, or Maddie is MADDE. I am ELLIE. You can email either of us with any questions you might have about this webinar content or really anything else, and we'll be happy to help you. I know we can't talk to all of your customers for you and with you, but we're trying to do our best to arm you with all the information you need to be the advocate for all of this for your customers that you can be. We did just get a quick question about needing to fill out the paper application before doing the online quote. Same rules apply now as they did before. Over 50 million in revenue, we're going to need the full app. If you need more than 3 million limits, we're going to need the full app. The system will prompt you if we are going to need it, so you can go ahead and do the online app. But we do have a short form paper app now that we have those few additional questions. If anybody would like a copy of that short form paper application, just let us know and we'll email it to you. We can just ping us in an email and we'll send it over to you right away. All right, Maddie, bring it home.
Yeah, of course. Ellie, I did get one more question. For the one-step webinar, are we sending out a recording afterwards?
Absolutely. What I encourage you to do is register for the webinar, whether you can attend or not. And then we can send you the copy afterwards because we'll know that you're interested. And that's the easiest way to do it.
Great. And Marion, yes, to answer your question, we can still quote online. You don't have to send in the short form app. All right. Anyone else before we end the webinar? Any questions, comments, feedback would be lovely. If not, yeah, just feel free to email us or use the chat system and we'd be happy to help.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us. And as always, you know where to find us. We'll catch you next time. Our next series of webinars is going to be about navigating the quote letter. Please be on the lookout for that information, as we've got some updated coverages and we're going to talk to you about how to talk to your customers about what actual coverages are included in a good cyber policy. So stay tuned for that. Thank you all for coming and have a great rest of your week.